Hi, good morning, wherever you are. So, ego and superego. Do you even know what that is? How does it affect you? And how in particular, or why in particular, do we need to understand ego and superego when we are dealing with trauma? So, let's start with the basics. So, ego is the part of the mind that deals with reality. It's our sense of self that balances desires with the demands of our reality. So think of ego as sort of a mediator. It helps us to make decisions by negotiating between our primal desires. And in fact, our primal desires comes from identity and our moral standards, which are imposed by our superego. So our ego operates on a reality principle. It keeps us grounded. It tries to satisfy our identity's desires. It's realistic and it's also socially appropriate. So over the last few weeks and the last couple of months, we've been working on identity work. We've been doing work with dissociation. We've been doing parts work because trauma destroys those areas of our life. It reduces our self-conscious. It reduces our sense of self, of who we are. And working in ego or understanding ego and the superego is absolutely imperative to help us understand how we can move from trauma quicker, but at the deepest level. So ego is really closely linked to our identity. So it shapes how we see ourselves and how we present ourselves to the outside world. So when you think about who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, your likes, your dislikes, you're engaging with your ego, okay? Now, what is the superego? So the superego is our moral compass. It contains the internalized ideas and the standards we acquire. And you know what's so interesting? We get that from our parents and from the society that we live in. How important is that? Because if our parents don't have a good moral compass, or it's not our society or our environment, the people that we're in direct control with don't have a moral compass, how do we get that as children? So the superego strives for perfection, but it also judges our actions. It makes us feel proud when we live up to these standards, but also guilty when we don't achieve it. So our superego works on the morality principle. It guides us to follow our rules for our life, maybe the rules of society. But the big problem is it also helps us aim for perfection. So our superego can be thought of as the voice of our consciousness. It holds us accountable to our values and norms that we internalize, and it often reflects the standards that we are taught during our upbringing. But how does ego or the superego affect us generally? How does it influence our behavior? Now, the ego and the superego will constantly interact to shape our behavior. And when they are in balance, it can navigate life's challenges really well, really effectively. And what happens to us doesn't really impact us that much. However, if we have any form of psychological distress, imbalance, anxiety, trauma, it creates a massive imbalance for us. And it creates the symptoms that are common in most of our clients who work with us: anxiety, stress, depression, etc. So what is the influence that it has on trauma? Well, it totally disrupts the balance between ego and superego. So for example, if someone's had or experienced a traumatic childhood abuse or emotional abuse, the superego might become excessively harsh, and it leads to intense feelings of guilt and worthlessness. So what does it do? It reduces our self-esteem. It reduces our self-confidence within ourselves. Now, there are two amazing theorists called Jung and Freud, and if you've studied a little bit of therapy or psychology, you would have heard of them. They are very influential in the work of ego and superego. But what we need to work on is, how do we improve our ego and our superego, or how do we even know how it works? Is it working for us and working against us? Now, this week in our Trauma Recovery Method program, we're working on these concepts. We are learning to understand ourselves much better. So, for example, a really good example of is dealing with anger. A lot of people have anger when you've been traumatized. So our identity wants to lash out and be really angry, but our ego finds it socially unacceptable to express anger. So what happens is our superego tries to evaluate and express an opinion, and it tries to align what we need to do, and it just causes mass confusion. And that's why people lash out and stay angry. Now, there is always conflict between the ego and superego when you have suffered trauma. That has a massive impact on your identity, your sense of self, who you are, and that will then create parts conflict. So one part feels like this, one part feels like that, and they're like magnets. They move apart from each other. Actually, what they want to be doing is they probably have the same outcome. They probably have the same they want the same things for you. It's often safety and protection. But trauma means that we aren't able to manage that for ourselves. So if you're interested to know more, or you feel really aligned with what I've said, come and find out more about our Trauma Recovery Method program. In the group, you will find that there is a link to booking a consultation with us. It gives you access to a calendar to book a call with me. Come and have that conversation, and let's see how we can make you better. I hope that today resonated with you. If you have any questions, just message me at the bottom of today's live. Send me a DM and I'll get back to you. Have an amazing day. Bye.